Good evening, everyone. Officials in Minneapolis hoping for calm tonight after a former police officer was charged with murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. As firefighters cooled the flames from another night of unrest and destruction, the county attorney announced that there was enough evidence to prove Derek Chauvin's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On Monday, the now fired officer pinned Floyd's neck to the ground for several minutes as he pleaded he couldn't breathe. Our Gabe Gutierrez is in Minneapolis tonight. Gabe, what's the mood on the ground right now?
Lester, calm so far. The mayor here has just imposed a nighttime curfew this weekend. There's also a bigger police presence. What is unclear is whether that might ramp up tensions after an arrest that many protesters here had been waiting for.
Tonight, after days of anger, pain, and protests, an arrest connected to the death of George Floyd. Fired Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin is now charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter.
I'm not insensitive to what's happened in the streets. My job is to do it only when we have sufficient evidence. We have it today.
State charging documents allege that Chauvin had his knee on Floyd's neck for 2 minutes and 53 seconds after Floyd became non-responsive, according to body camera video. In all, the complaint says Chauvin had his knee on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes. No response yet from Chauvin's attorney. The third night of protests had been the most violent by far. For hours, anarchy. Rioters breached and burned this evacuated police precinct. Other buildings crumbled. Local police and firefighters retreated.
It's a scene of utter chaos. Right now, this fire is raging out of control, and smoke is billowing into the air, can be seen for miles.
At daybreak, the destruction devastated this South Minneapolis community.
I'm a grown man, and I'm standing here, teared up.
Anger over one man's death had turned into much more, an explosion of fury over years of mistreatment.
This city knew it was coming. They knew it was coming.
Lynette Weisner has lived here all her life.
This right here, the war's here. Do something about it.
And this is
Clean up this police department.
Today, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz promised to restore order and directly criticized local leaders for an inadequate response.
And the reason we're standing here today is if this would have been executed correctly, the state would not lead on this. That did not happen.
The mayor has not yet responded. The governor also apologized to CNN after the State Patrol arrested 3 of its journalists on live television, even as looters and vandals were allowed to run free.
I am deeply apologetic that this happened. It is wrong. It is unacceptable, and we needed to correct it.
I just hope we can recover from this.
Today's arrest was the news longtime resident Kirsten Olsen had been waiting for.
I'm ecstatically happy.
James Lawson is more skeptical.
I felt like there was a little bit of sign of relief, but like I said, what about the other 3?
The county attorney says an investigation is underway into the other 3 fired officers, and he anticipates charges. New video from a different angle shows 2 of the officers, not seen before, side by side on the ground next to Officer Chauvin during the incident. Late today, the attorney for Floyd's family responded to the arrest.
They're a little relieved today that the officer was finally arrested. However, they wanted the charges to be first-degree murder.
For a 4th night, this city is on edge, wondering if one officer's arrest is enough to diffuse the tension or whether the anger runs too deep. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, Minneapolis.
I'm Blaine Alexander. Miles from Minneapolis, anger, frustration pouring into the streets of America.
That could be my father. That could be my brother. That could be me.
From Atlanta to Boston, Houston to Memphis. Demonstrations turned violent in Denver when a car plowed through protesters. No one was seriously injured.
As a young black woman, I'm used to not being heard, but this one, it hits different.
For many, the death of George Floyd only piling on to the mounting anger over the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. The 26-year-old EMT shot at least 8 times last March by police officers who stormed into her home, serving a narcotics search warrant as she and her boyfriend slept. Overnight, in her hometown of Louisville, gunshots ripped through this crowd of protesters, injuring 7.
These shots came from within the crowd, not from police officers.
The peaceful protest erupting into violence on the same day the world heard this frantic 911 call from Taylor's boyfriend.
I don't know what's happening. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
Police say the officers knocked and identified themselves. Taylor's family says they did neither.
Is she alert and able to talk to you?
No, she's not. Breathe.
Okay, and you said you're in apartment number 4?
Hell, oh my God.
Kenneth Walker, who says he thought the officers were intruders, fired a shot that injured 1 officer. The officers have not been charged, and Taylor's family says no drugs were ever found in the house. The police union has not returned requests for comment. Taylor's family thanking protesters, but begging for peace.
Please go home, be safe, and be ready to keep fighting.
No matter what's done, no matter how many protests, it keeps happening.
I can't breathe!
Gathering in the midst of a pandemic, protesters say they are now forced to fight a different virus, racism. Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Atlanta.
And also late today, protesters in San Jose, California made their way onto Highway 101, bringing the highway to a standstill. Traffic backed up, unable to move, a major situation that was developing there. And there are also protests growing in New York City. NBC's Ron Allen is there. Ron, what's the scene?
Lester, a second day of protest, a We Can't Breathe rally here in New York. Support for George Floyd out in Minneapolis, but also an echo of the Erupt Garner case here. It's been 6 years since that incident in Staten Island. Garner killed at the hands of NYPD police. 6 years later, no one charged with any criminal offense. We've heard chants of, "I can't breathe," "Hands up, don't shoot." We've seen arrests here. There were 70 arrests last night in protests. A lot of energy, a lot of intensity, years of grievance here being vented on the streets of New York. Lester?
All right, Ron Allen in New York, thank you. We've been on the air now for just over 8 minutes, and that's just about the same length of time prosecutors say that officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck. 8 minutes and 46 seconds as Floyd first pleaded that he couldn't breathe and then became unresponsive, in a restraint that is especially dangerous. And as our justice correspondent Pete Williams reports, it's not the first time it's had deadly consequences.
It's such disturbing video. George Floyd handcuffed, lying on his stomach, with a police officer's knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes as he begs for breath.
I can't breathe.
But it's not the first time a Minneapolis police officer has used a widely criticized tactic that can turn fatal. Minneapolis paid $3 million in 2013 to settle a lawsuit in the case of David Smith, who died after police pinned him face down with an officer's knee on his back. The family's lawyer, Robert Bennett, told our Minneapolis station KARE the tactic is a killing mechanism.
It's really no different than strangling somebody.
Baltimore and the state of Maryland paid $1 million 3 years ago to settle a lawsuit brought by the relatives of Tyrone West, who died after police suspected drugs during a traffic stop, laid him on the ground face down, and sat on him. An independent autopsy said he suffocated. About 500,000 times a year, police restrain subjects they arrest by putting them face down. But many departments now discourage or even ban putting pressure on the back or neck in that position. 25 years ago, a Justice Department bulletin warned that the technique can cause sudden death. It said a person lying on his stomach has trouble breathing when pressure is applied to his back. As soon as the person is handcuffed, it said, get him off his stomach. Most police departments now say once subjects are handcuffed, they should be rolled over or allowed to sit or stand. Experts on policing universally condemn what happened in Minneapolis.
There hasn't been one person, one police chief, anyone I've talked to who doesn't see this exactly the same way. The police officer and those who were there that day, they failed George Floyd.
The charges filed today say police are trained that this kind of restraint, putting a knee on a subject who's lying face down, is inherently dangerous. Lester?
All right, Pete Williams, thanks. President Trump late today saying he has reached out to George Floyd's family, but he's also defending a tweet about Minneapolis that Twitter flagged for, quote, glorifying violence. Meantime, former Vice President Biden and former President Obama are also responding. With that, here's Peter Alexander.
Someday they will.
Tonight, President Trump says he's spoken to the family of George Floyd.
I understand the hurt. I understand the pain. People have really been through a lot. The family of George is entitled to justice, and the people of Minnesota are entitled to live in safety.
Also talking about these scenes in Minneapolis.
The looters should not be allowed to drown out the voices of so many peaceful protesters. They hurt so badly.
Earlier, the president addressed a new break with China from the Rose Garden, but walked out without making any mention of Minnesota. But it was this tweet that led Twitter to place a label on the president's comments for the second time this week. The president overnight tweeting, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts." Twitter posting a public interest notice saying the tweet violated the company's rules about glorifying violence. The decision, the company says, was based on the historical context of the president's words and the risk it could inspire similar actions today. During the civil uprisings of the late 60s, Miami's police chief credited the calm there with his "get tough" warning. Quote, "I've let the word filter down that when the looting starts, the shooting starts." Late tonight, the president trying to clarify.
I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it originated. It's very accurate in the sense that when you do have looting like you had last night, people often get shot and they die, and that's not good, and we don't want that to happen.
The president earlier calling Minneapolis's Democratic mayor Jacob Frey very weak, saying he needs to bring the city under control.
Weakness is pointing your finger at somebody else during a time of crisis. Donald Trump knows nothing about the strength of Minneapolis.
Former Vice President Joe Biden saying he also spoke to Floyd's family.
This is a national crisis. We need real leadership right now. Leadership that will bring everyone to the table so we can take measures to root out systemic racism.
And former President Obama weighing in. This shouldn't be normal in 2020 America. It can't be normal. If we want our children to grow up in a nation that lives up to its highest ideals, we can and must be better. Also tonight, President Trump announced he's ending the U.S.'s relationship with the World Health Organization, saying the agency is totally controlled by China, who he blames for the outbreak. And he's promising to sanction Chinese officials for their new move, threatening freedoms in Hong Kong. Lester?
Peter Alexander at the White House tonight. Thanks. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.